I remember a sad time. I was just left flowers at Deb's and Lincoln's house after the loss of Samuel. And I was driving home crying like a little baby because I realized just how much pain there was in their lives. So for me to see Amy dedicated, it's just amazing blessing that speaks to not just Justin's family and relatives, but also to us pastors, to us as a church. And as I was driving away, one song was going through my mind, and this is More Than Enough. It's by Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. If you can iTunes it and play it. More Than Enough is an amazing song. Jesus has to be more than enough in our lives, because everything, every blessing is in Him. And in our losses, we should remember too that in Him resurrection comes, new lives comes, and everything comes from Him. It's interesting demonstrating in this word, pardoned, that I chose as a title. I want to tell you a story that really showed me, touched me, as I was listening to this story about how Jesus really is everything. A town on Springwood, Georgia, is close to border of Tennessee. And it's a small town where everyone knows everyone's business. And they all knew what happened to McCracken Poston. Now, you wouldn't believe it, but McCracken is the first name of this gentleman who used to be a state representative for Georgia. And then in 1996, he lost by landslide. And after saying his goodbyes to politics, he went back to the law. McCracken was walking one day in the street in this little place, Ringgold. He was walking to his vehicle when he heard a voice coming from this shuttered old TV repair shop. "You've got beaten, didn't you?" He turned around, and there was a guy called Alvin Ridley. He was a TV repairman in the town, but the place that his little TV shop looked just old and neglected, and something that you would not bring your TV there, really. Everyone in the town knew who Alvin is. They called him Crazy Alvin. He had a house somewhere where there was a lots of private properties and beware of the dog signs. He had a reputation of being crazy, and when people did see him going to his shop, he was not a very pleasant man to talk to. He was recluse. It was nothing about him that would say, "I want to talk to you." He must have had some conditions, people thought, because the words which they used for him was weird, eccentric, crazy. Alvin even allegedly threatened some customers who crossed him and had become more and more detached from this community. On October 4, 1997, McCracken, the lawyer, was again in town when he overheard people talk about an old dead woman found at that crazy Alvin Ridley's place. People didn't know if that was like a rotting corpse or it was just skeleton found at his house, but no one expected. Everybody was surprised when they found out that it wasn't a rotting corpse, it wasn't a skeleton woman, it was just a freshly dead person in his home. "Who is she?" everybody asked. When people became aware that this deceased woman was actually Alvin's wife, everybody was saying, "What? He had a wife. He lived here like 30 years in this town. It's a town of 2,400 people, if I remember correctly, and we never met his wife." Everyone was surprised. Deceased was Virginia Ridley, and records confirmed that she, in fact, was married to Alvin for many years. But no one knew anything about her. Where has she been all this time? What has she been doing? Why is she not been to town? People were talking. People were making up the stories. They were curious about the fact that Alvin didn't behave as someone who was grieving. But when he called 911 emergencies, he didn't do it from home because he didn't have phone. He went to town from the payphone, and his voice sounded very matter of fact. There was nothing urgent. There was nothing emotional about it. He just said, my wife is dead. I'm afraid she's not breathing. Alvin told authorities that his wife died of epilepsy seizure. But the death of epilepsy is very unusual and rare in this time and day. When the coroner turned up at Alvin's house, Alvin protested that he does not enter his premises. And he was saying that there is nothing to examine. She just died of an epilepsy and she should be buried. Of course, this even further instigated stories about what happened. Authorities found Virginia's family, and they told another piece of the story. They did marry a long time ago, 30 years earlier, but they've almost never seen her since then. Every time they would call Virginia, Alvin would say, she can't be really bothered. She just had a shower. She wants to do this. She wants to do that. She didn't even turn up at her father's funeral. And the family, as much as they fought to see Virginia, simply could not get to see her for 30 years. In their mind, it was simply clear that Alvin is keeping her as a slave at home and that she is not free woman to move, to talk to anyone, that she is in fact there unwillingly in his home. The story was that he kept her in the basement and only let her out when he was home, and now that his finances are depleted, he decided to kill her. They hadn't charged him yet, so he was free to roam, and so to go walk around. And on streets of his town, he ran again into this lawyer, Krklec. And after a little bit of talking, Alvin asked him, can you be my lawyer? I think I'll be charged, and I think I'll need your services. They think I killed my wife, but it's all government's big conspiracy. He had many, many conspiracy theories going on in his head, and he was sharing it with anyone who would listen to him. Through talking, Alvin said how he was desperate, how he's sad, and eventually Krklec agreed to represent him at the court. The whole town was sure that Alvin tortured, enslaved, and killed Virginia. So when Krklec was asking for the court to take place somewhere else, where the case is not so well known, and this was actually denied to him, he was desperate, and he realized that there is little chance of Alvin being listened fairly, unbiasedly. Alvin was 56-year-old, looked much older than that, always was wearing old clothes, was always shaven, kept his hair combed, but it was obvious that he was falling apart. His clothes were falling apart. His house was falling apart. And around that time, when he was going to court, Alvin started wearing a very smelly old neck brace. That was one of the things that people wear when they are in a fake car accident and try to sue someone for damages. Krklec says that the neck brace was so old and so sweaty and brown and reeked badly, and he had to ask Alvin to go take a shower and put some new clothes on just so they could talk because he smelled so badly. When the autopsy arrived, there was some pretty damning evidence. Virginia's body was small, delicately framed. She was about 49-year-old, and she had particular hemorrhaging around her eyes, which is indicating that she died of asphyxiation or a lack of breath. And therefore, it was very clear to everyone, including the coroner, that Alvin has killed his wife. Further discovery looked at Alvin's home, where they found Virginia's body and found all these boarding up like signs, keep away. And the story was really coming together. Alvin is a sicko who holds wife hostage for 30 years, then kills her. And everybody was pretty sure that this is exactly what happened. Her disappearance, their lookout, what they found with hemorrhaging of everything and so on. To McCracken, who failed to be reelected as a politician, this looked like another failure in his life. And he realized he's done a terrible mistake to represent Alvin, who obviously was a murderer. McCracken did manage to find one supportive piece of evidence that would support Alvin's story that Virginia simply died of epileptic seizure in her dream. It turned out that there was another autopsy of someone who had died of epileptic seizure and demonstrated the same hemorrhaging around eyes that Virginia had and around mouth like Virginia had. That would support Alvin's claim, McCracken realized. But it's only pushing towards this way. He's not sure what else could he say to show that he didn't kill his wife. There was this still nagging doubt. Why would that woman not want to go out and see people? Why would she not go shopping? Why would she not go to see her father or be at her father's funeral? What is going on with this mystery woman? And Alvin still wouldn't allow his own lawyer, McCracken, into his own home. He would simply not allow him to come into his home. By the time the court was about to start, the case would start, McCracken had absolutely no evidence apart from this other autopsy of the person who died also from epileptic seizures. The Thanksgiving came, and McCracken's parents wanted him to go and to Alvin's place and bring him some food. They were sure that man doesn't cook really well, not in that house. Without announcing himself, McCracken knocked on the door. Alvin opened, and he gave him food. And Alvin, surprisingly, invited him inside his home. Finally, McCracken was inside the home. The first part was closed in porch. It was full of vermin and full of odor. Alvin was sure in claiming this was cats. You find a nice word, I can't think of this right now. Kids were doing their business around the house. But when he entered the main room, he found actually it was trying to be kept clean and clear and so on, although everything was old and musty and had this odor that is not quite pleasant. And then on the walls were covered with writings. Someone has handwritten tens of thousands of notes, big and small, and all of these notes were covering all walls of this inside room. And when McCracken looked at this, he noticed that all notes are written in the same handwriting, very unique handwriting. And he asked Alvin, who wrote all these notes? And McCracken said, Virginia wrote it. Virginia had a condition called hypographia. It compelled her to write down everything that went through her mind. And so she had this condition for decades. Among these tens of thousands of documents, McCracken found an entry from just about every month in the past 27 years. She talked about moon landing, letters to 3 presidents that she wrote to them. She wrote her own TV show together with the casting of who she thought should be casted for this show. And lawyer said, McCracken said, I have to have this. I have to show to the court what's happening. But Alvin wouldn't let him, because in his own words, that's all I have from her. On the first day of trial, when Alvin and McCracken walked into the courtroom, they walked in with an old suitcase that looked from 1950s, and everybody was wondering, what's inside this suitcase? People were able to see McCracken stopping the ground where they were sitting, and his foot was going further and further. Cockroaches were coming out of the suitcase, and he tried to kill them before they could go everywhere else. They were coming out of this old nasty suitcase en masse. They were crawling all over the papers and tables, and it was just a mess. When McCracken opened this suitcase, people were curious about it because, in a way, this mysterious woman became alive through her writing, and they could see not only what Virginia was like, but also what was her relationship with Alvin. For most parts, Virginia's letters and notes started with Alvin and Virginia, Alvin and Virginia, Alvin and Virginia. It became obvious that Virginia was choosing to be with Alvin, that she was not locked in the house, that she was not deprived of the freedom. In her writings, Virginia explains that she never ventured outside because of her epilepsy. Her biggest fear was to have an epileptic seizure in a public place. She hated outside, and this home with Alvin was her protection. This was her comfort. It was her castle. In one of the 5 Bibles that Virginia owns, she wrote in 1977, "I've stopped taking my medicine today. God has told me He was going to take care of me from now on." And she lived 20 years not medicating. And that, of course, set her up for the classic sudden death epilepsy case. Finally, things started looking better for them. The jury was able to see and read her unique writing and see that they had a relationship. That everywhere on these tens of thousands of documents there was Alvin as her man, as her love, as a respected man that supported her. They married quite young. As soon as Alvin has left army where he trained to be a technician. And finally, when the jury came back, when this happened, McCracken realized that perhaps they have a chance. He asked McCracken, go in with some of your church friends, because some of them started actually coming now to encourage him. And then when he went and had a dinner with them, he came back and said, "I want to take a stand." And this is one thing McCracken didn't want to happen. But he was insistent, and Alvin took stand. And he talked. He was cross-examined for over 2 hours. And he talked about his love. He talked about their lives. And when they asked him, "How come you never have children?" he simply said, very sadly, "We were never blessed." Jury realized that these two have a real relationship. As jury was coming back, McCracken found himself not only standing very close to this smelly man, but hugging him very, very tightly because he cared for him now. He cared for this man who obviously loved his wife. And when jury came back, there were 3 counts that he was accused of, and jury read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, count 1, not guilty. Count 2, not guilty. Count 3, not guilty. And the courtroom absolutely exploded because everybody was convinced that they were a loving husband and wife. And when he was leaving the court with his suitcase of 1950s and his bags of belongings, they left free, and Alvin was freed. As I was reading this story, actually listening on the podcast, I was wondering one thing. What has convinced the jury that Alvin hasn't killed his wife? What has justified Alvin when there was such amount of evidence against him? When everyone thought that he is guilty and people had good reasons probably to believe in this, what justified him? I will tell you what it was. It was Virginia's relationship with Alvin, as evident through the letters and what she was writing. It was nothing that Alvin could do on his part to justify himself. It looked like he is guilty, but an account of a relationship that was presented This is the only thing that justified and showed the world truth about their relationship. For me, this is so much like me. All of us are a little bit odd, a little bit weird, a little bit crazy. All of us have a sentence hanging around us. We have, in fact, sinned. Alvin hasn't. We have, in fact, done something which offends God. We have been evil. We have done all these things. It's true. But in the same way, Jesus comes, and Jesus' righteousness, his relationship with us, justifies all of our sins and take them away. Jesus dies so that we would have a relationship, so that we would then take his righteousness and put it over us. In the end, you and I can't do nothing. What we can is come to the table of grace. And I'm going to invite you in a second to do just this. As a way of your rededication to God. We do this a few times a year.